And those of you who are not speaking, why you can turn your microphone off. I'm Jonathan Wilson, president of the First Friday Breakfast Club, and I want to welcome all of you to another meeting of the First Friday Breakfast Club. We've been going strong since 1996, and in that time we have raised over $400,000 for scholarships for Iowa high school students who have done courageous things to reduce homophobia or to teach about LGBTQ issues in their schools and communities throughout Iowa. We would clearly prefer to have our traditional in-person meetings, and someday we should be able to get back to a new normal and enable ourselves to again be meeting in person. In the meantime, we are trying to take maximum advantage of meeting virtually. Meeting virtually allows us to reach out to notable speakers that are more geographically remote from central Iowa, and that is a tremendous opportunity. And in fact, this meeting and the next meeting and the following meeting are going to have national speakers. Today and the next two meetings, our speakers will be on the East Coast. Our last meeting, the first Friday of the month, our speaker was from California. So he was up and on the call at 5 o'clock in the morning. So when you think how frustrating it is to have to get out of bed for the 7 o'clock, why think about Roman Borsellino, who was online at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to accommodate our meeting this last time. The virtual meeting format also allows us to have a broader scope of participants who might not be in central Iowa either. And we have a number of those folks on the line today. Today happens to be the annual meeting of the First Friday Breakfast Club. It doesn't take very long, and I will call that meeting to order. And there are just two agenda items on our annual meeting agenda. The first is our traditional annual resolution as follows. The members hereby approve and ratify the acts and deeds of the Board of Directors and officers done and performed in conjunction with and after the last annual meeting of the members. I would invite someone to make that motion to adopt the resolution.
I so move.
All right, is there a second?
I will second.
Got it, we got second, okay, we're in great shape there. Is there anyone objecting to this resolution? Hearing none, it'll be deemed adopted. Thank you very much. The only other agenda item is a report of the nominating committee. The nominating committee this year was composed of myself, Gary Moore, Joe Rates, Rick Davis, and Kent Donaldson. And the nominating committee nominates the following four individuals for 3-year terms: David Cotton, Brad Holland, Ryan Crane, and Scott Kuknio. All of these are incumbents and all are engaged and willing to serve another term on the board. Are there any nominations from the floor? Hearing none, I invite a motion to elect the slate as presented by the nominating committee. Is there such a motion?
I move.
We've got a motion. Is there a second? We've got a second. Is there any objection to this motion? If not, that slate is deemed elected. There are no other business items on our agenda specifically, but are there any other items that anyone wants to have brought before our group at the annual meeting? Hearing none, then without objection, the business meeting is adjourned. We have just a few announcements before we get to our speaker this morning. I would encourage all of you to check out the First Friday Breakfast Club website. That's ffbciowa.org. You can access there a variety of resources, audio recordings of our past speakers, and you're going to be able to make contributions there to the scholarship fund or pay dues or otherwise contribute financially to the First Friday Breakfast Club. And the capability of being able to do all of that is thanks to the generosity of Brad Holland, Joe Rates, and Ascendant Wealth Management, who are sponsoring that technology and enable us to do some more things more easily and quickly. The next copy deadline for our monthly newsletter is next Monday, January the 11th. So for those of you who are regular contributors, that's our deadline for copy. If there are others of you who have something that you would like to share, get that information to me by the end of the day on Monday, and we will endeavor to get your contribution in the newsletter as well. In the near future, our plan is to go to online digitally with the newsletter. The bad news is that if you want a hard copy of the newsletter in the future here, when we get to that point, you'll have to print it off yourself. The good news is that you will be given a reminder and can use a link to go to the newsletter, and you'll be able to enjoy it in full living color. Our newsletter is done in color every month, but the copy costs is prohibitive to do that in color, and so we send it out in black and white. So with this new protocol, you'll be able to enjoy the newsletter in full color. As I say, we will be sending out an email reminder when there's a new issue of the monthly newsletter posted with the easy, quick access to a link that will take you to the newsletter. And so if you will make sure that your email that we have for you is current and accurate, then you'll get that kind of a reminder and the link to go to the newsletter. So be sure and make sure that we have your correct email. An easy way for you to know if we have your correct email is whether or not you got an email reminder of this meeting. If you did, then that's the email that we're using. That's the one we'll be using. And if your email changes, be sure and let us know so that you don't miss out on a monthly newsletter issue. Our next meeting of the Board of Directors, which will also be the annual meeting of the Board of Directors, where officers will be elected, is next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And certainly any member who would like to participate in the board meeting, you're more than welcome to do that. Just let me know and I'll get you the access information for the virtual board meeting. I give you one quick warning. We've been notified by our internet carrier here that they're doing some kind of a system upgrade that can take about 4 hours, and we don't know when they're going to start. They will cut us off at whatever point that is, and the project would be started sometime between 5 o'clock this morning and 11 o'clock this morning, and the project will take 4 hours apparently that we will be without internet. If that happens, our Vice President Byron Huff has a copy of the agenda material, and he'll pick up with the meeting, and I will then try and get back on using my hotspot or just participate by audio in the meeting as it goes forward. Are there any other announcements that need to be made? Hearing none, I will turn to David Cotton, who is going to introduce our speaker for this morning. David.
Good morning. Thank you, Jonathan. I've been a fan of Eric Marcus for 3 years, specifically the podcast Making Gay History that highlights the audio recordings from his research for the book of the same name. The subtitle of the podcast website is Bringing the Voices of LGBTQ History to Life Through Intimate Conversations with Champions, Heroes, and Witnesses to History. I can attest, having listened to every episode, that this is indeed the case, and would like to provide one personal example on the impact of these voices in the introduction. I was still closeted just a few years ago, secretly binge listening to Making Gay History while driving to work, doing yard work, or digging a trench in the front yard for my underground dog fence. I was deeply touched while listening to season 2, episode 8, with Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husen, telling their story to Eric on December 18th, 1989, about their efforts in the early 1970s to convince the American Psychiatric Association Board of Trustees to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual on Mental Health. While discussing the impact of the work, Barbara said, even if it's the only gay person out in Iowa who feels encouraged by hearing somebody stand up and say this on our behalf, that's to the good. So at 50 years old, standing in my yard, digging a slit trench for a dog fence on a hot August afternoon, I was the gay person in Iowa who realized it was really okay to be who I was meant to be. In addition to his work on making gay history, his other books include It's a Choice, Why Suicide, and Breaking the Surface, the #1 New York Times bestselling autobiography of Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis. Please welcome Eric Marcus to the First Friday Breakfast Club.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm really moved by that story about listening to Barbara and Kay. They have had such a huge impact on so many people's lives. And I'll be sharing a clip from one of those interviews with Barbara and Kay during the presentation today. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you. It's really a privilege to be sharing, but I see somebody's having breakfast and I haven't had breakfast yet. It's okay. I'll be in Iowa eventually, and I look forward to having breakfast with all of you. It's my favorite meal of the day. I have been to Iowa a number of times. It was the first place I was invited to speak after the publication of my first book, The Male Couples Guide, in 1988, because there was an attempt to ban my book from the public library in Muscatine, Iowa. I was subsequently invited by one of the colleges to come speak. The librarians, who are amazing people in general, fought back and the book was not banned. So, and I've been to Des Moines. So just so you know, I haven't just lived in Queens. I've been around a little bit. So what I'm going to do today, and actually quite quickly, because I want to share this whole presentation with you, I'm going to take you on a quick audio tour of our history, using clips from the Making Gay History archive. I'll use photographs and audio and tell brief stories. It's, of course, frustrating for me that I don't get to tell you lots of stories around each episode, but I'd like for you to hear the material. And then I will take your questions, and what's easiest is if you put your questions in the chat box, and then I'll answer them. But if you prefer to raise your hand when we get to the Q&A period, we can do it that way as well. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. We have internet issues here in New York City, even on West 20th Street, a mile south of Times Square. Quite literally, we sometimes have squirrels and rats chew through the wires, which are run along the backs of our buildings. I live in an old neighborhood. So if I freeze or cut out, I will switch over to my hotspot. I'll be right back. This has happened many times. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And here we go. So first, have a listen to the lyrics. Listen closely. This is Edith Ide, also known as Lisa Ben, singing to me on her front porch in 1989. One of the songs that she wrote, and I'll tell you more about her career as a singer after you hear the song. Oh. Here we go.
Ready to warm up? Yeah, I need to warm up a little bit. I should tune up a little bit first. Hello, young lovers, whatever you are, I hope your problems are few. All you cute butches lined up at the bar, I've had a love like you. Stay cool, young lovers, and follow your star. Stay cool, be faithful and true. Don't mess around with the opposite sex. It won't do a thing for you. I know what it means to wear customized jeans and go out for a casual cruise. You saunter on by and that glint in your eyes speaks of hope you can never quite lose. Don't cry, young lovers, because I'm alone. I've a stockpile of wild memories. A gay senior citizen, all on my own. At least I can do as I please. Senior life has compensations, my friends, and at least I can do as I please.
So the person you hear applauding there is me. More than 30 years ago, I didn't go to interview Edith Ide because she was a musician. I had read about the newsletter that she wrote in 1947 for lesbians on her office typewriter at RKO Radio Pictures in Hollywood, where she was a secretary. She had a job where her boss told her she would not be busy all the time, but he wanted her to look busy, but he didn't want her to read or knit. So if you were a lesbian in 1947, a gay person in 1947, and your boss said, keep busy, what would you do? And what she did was she wrote a newsletter for lesbians, typed it through twice with 5 sheets of carbon paper. And I don't have to explain what carbon paper is to most of you. Although when I speak to college groups, they have no idea what I'm talking about. And she distributed those 10 copies to her friends. And they distributed them to their friends. If you want to see her newsletter, you can go to the Making Gay History website at makinggayhistory.com and look at Edith's episode. We have a link to actual copies of the newsletter. So that's why I went to interview Edith. But I found out when interviewing her that she sang in gay clubs in the 1950s and 60s. She didn't like the entertainment that she found at the lesbian clubs, which was principally directed at the men who would be allowed into the clubs at night to watch the girls dance, which is the creepiest thing I think I heard in all the interviews I did. And the people who did the entertainment were usually drag queens who made jokes about gay people playing to the straight people in the audience. So she said, I'm going to write my own songs, or I'm going to write lyrics to popular songs. And so she sang in the clubs. Her guitar and its leopard covered case now resides at the One Archives at the USC Libraries in Los Angeles. I got to see it. It was thrilling. So the reason I interviewed Edith, as I said, better known as Lisa Ben, and if you play word games, you figure out what Lisa Ben spells, lesbian. I interviewed her because of her newsletter. And in the newsletter, she had a column called the Whatchama column, in which she talked about whatever was on her mind. And here's just a short clip from the interview with Edith Ide about her Whatchama column and her thoughts about the future.
It was just some writing that I wanted to do to get it off my chest. And I was a very lonely person, and I could sort of fantasize this way by writing the magazine, you see. And then I'd write the end, the whatchama column, and that was just ideas that happened off the top of my head that I would write about and say, wouldn't it be wonderful if, not fantasize exactly, but imagine about how things might be in the future with us.
What were some of the things you imagined?
Well, I imagined that perhaps we would have a lot of magazines and that perhaps even movies might be made about us. I would hope that someday we would not be looked down on with so much disdain.
Well, I think this may be where this is the column, this is the article, Here to Stay. September 1947, Volume 1, Number 4. Whether the unsympathetic majority approves or not, it looks as though the third sex is here to stay. With the advancement of psychiatry and related subjects, the world is becoming more and more aware that there are those in our midst who feel no attraction for the opposite sex. Homosexuality is becoming less and less a taboo subject, and although still considered by the general public as contemptible or treated with derision, I venture to predict that there will be a time in the future when gay folk will be accepted as part of regular society. That's pretty bold stuff.
Well, I guess it is. I never thought of it as being bold at the time. I was just, as I say, I was just sort of fantasizing. But it all has come to pass.
And it has, and more. Lisa Ben lived to age 94. She died in 2015. She spent the last few years of her life in a nursing facility. She felt compelled to go back into the closet because she was afraid that she would be treated badly by the nursing staff if they knew that she was a lesbian, which I find tragic. When she died, there wasn't a single obituary about her, even though she's one of the heroes of the movement. So it's to me an enormous privilege to have recorded her story and to be able to share it so that we can all know about one of the pioneers of the movement. 1947, there was no Breakfast Club, there was nothing. But she had the foresight and the imagination to believe that what has come to pass would come to pass. Wendell Sayers is somebody I didn't expect to interview. When I did my history book, I created a timeline doing all kinds of research because there was no timeline of our movement. And one of the names I came across was Elver Barker, who was involved with the Mattachine Society, an organization founded in 1950 in Los Angeles, which is where I start, early morning presentations are very challenging. My brain is still fuzzy. I marked the beginning of the movement as 1950 when the Mattachine Society was founded in LA. So Wendell's story goes way back before that. Oh, so I'm sorry, I was talking about Elver Barker. So Elver Barker was involved with the Mattachine Society in the late 1950s in Denver. The Mattachine Society had had a convention in Denver, Colorado in 1959. And when I spoke with Elver in advance of going to Denver, he said, oh, you really should speak to Wendell Sayers. We had a falling out years ago. I haven't talked to him in ages. That never happens among LGBTQ people, a falling out. When young people say to me, well, you know, I wish we could be together the way the movement used to be. And it's like, well, no, it was never that way. Gay people are humans too, and we have disagreements. So he hadn't talked to Wendell in years. Wendell's story was extraordinary. So I wound up interviewing Elver Barker, but he didn't make the book because Wendell did. So Wendell was in his mid 80s when I interviewed him. He went to that 1959 convention. He was African-American. An attorney, the first attorney to work for the first African-American attorney to work for the state attorney general in Denver, Colorado. He didn't want me to use his name in the book. In the book, I called him Paul Phillips, but his real name is Wendell Sayers, a cousin of Gale Sayers, the famous football player. So he didn't want me to use his real name because he was afraid his relatives in Western Kansas would find out that he was gay and it would embarrass him. So this clip that I'm going to play for you about Wendell is from 1920. It's a story from 1920. His parents sent him to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He and his mother drove across from Kansas to Rochester, Minnesota, camped along the side of the road, ate on the side of the road because they couldn't stay at hotels because they wouldn't allow Black people to eat at the restaurants or stay at hotels. He was 16 years old. He was diagnosed as a homosexual. He was terrified about going home. He was with his mother and he had to go home and tell his father that he was gay. And this is where the story picks up.
So we went back home and reported to Dad. I might say this, that I was an adopted child. Mm-hmm. And I often used to wonder as a kid, what will he do when he finds it out? See, will he put me out or kick me out, or will he accept me? My dad was very understanding. I say understanding, I don't think he actually understood, but he was willing to accept, I should say. Mm-hmm. So he finally told me, he says, well, since they don't know what to do about it, find you a friend that you can trust and bring them home. Because I don't want you playing around on the streets or out on the country roads, because you never know who's going to step up behind you or step up on you. Bring them home. What you do in your room is your business, because they didn't want me out on the street.
One of the extraordinary things to me about that story was the acceptance of his parents. And I found that among a lot of the older gay and lesbian people I interviewed, that their parents did indeed embrace them. That wasn't, of course, the case for everyone, but it was for Wendell. And it had, of course, a great impact on his life, that he was loved. The last thing Wendell said to me on the steps of, actually it was a question that he said to me on the steps of his house as I was leaving was, do you think it's too late for me to meet somebody? He was 86 years old. He was not out. He had been out at his church to two church members, two young gay men, both of whom died of AIDS. He lived a very isolated life, and I knew that the odds of him meeting anybody at that stage were just about zero. But I lied and I said it's never too late. because he was so alone. And that was also the case among many of the older gay and lesbian people I interviewed. Sylvia Rivera is something of an icon, is known well to people, especially young people today, was an early trans activist. This picture is from 1970. Sylvia was one of the people who spoke about being at the Stonewall Uprising, and what I was so surprised in studying the Stonewall Uprising and talking to people who were there was how young the kids were, who were the first to challenge the police. They were 16, 17, 18 years old, mostly street kids. They were homeless. They made money on the street by hustling. Sylvia was on the street from age 11 and making money as a hustler. And I said, how did you do it at that, at age 11? She said, it was easy at that age, which I found horrifying. So this is Sylvia Rivera sharing a story about the first night of the Stonewall Uprising.
To be there, it's just like, oh, it was so beautiful. I just like, it's like.
Was it exciting?
Oh, it was so exciting. It was like, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're fucking their nerves. The cops were, they just panicked. Inspector Pine really panicked. Mm-hmm. He really did. Mm-hmm. Plus, he had no backup. Mm-hmm. He knew. He did not expect any of the retaliation that the gay community gave him at that point.
Do you think all this was in part because people were so angry for so long?
People were very angry for so long. I mean, how long can you live in a closet?
One of the things I heard repeatedly from people I interviewed, especially when I would say to them, how did you have the courage to do what you did? They would say, I was angry. I was angry at being beaten up. I was angry about being thrown out of my home. I was angry because a friend was killed. Or they talked about love and the search for love, that they wanted a boyfriend or girlfriend and joined a group like your organization, so they could meet other people like themselves and find a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I mean, Sylvia obviously was one of those people who was not accepted by her family and wound up out on the streets. I learned an important lesson about oral history. And I should say Sylvia was very involved post-Stonewall in the movement. Not always a welcome presence because of how she presented, and was a complicated person. But I learned an important lesson about about oral history from this interview with Sylvia, because it turns out from research done by David Carter, who wrote the definitive book on the Stonewall Uprising, we're not there at all.
I think he froze up.
Okay, it looks like our speaker did freeze up as he predicted. And we'll give it a moment for him to get connected back to us. And as I mentioned earlier, this freeze up thing could happen at any moment with Scott and me as well. And if that happens, well, we'll try to switch over to a hotspot and try to reconnect at that point.
I'm back. I'm back. Sorry about that.
Here we are.
You see me? Yeah.
Yes.
It froze up. I'm gonna just tell me where you lost me, and then I'll go back to where I was. Was I talking about Sylvia and the challenge of oral history?
Yes.
Yes. I'm gonna go back to screen share. Bear with me. Sorry about that. The squirrels must have gotten to the wires again. There we are. Okay. So what I say about oral history is it's how we remember it, how we would like to remember it, and how we would like to remember ourselves in it. I'm going to be doing a season on the AIDS crisis coming up in June, and I will be interviewed for it by our researcher. And I realized that my memories of that time are informed by everything that came after, and that some of what I remember is actually not accurate. So all of these oral histories are not necessarily fact, they are people's stories, and I took them at face value. So Sylvia's was particularly complicated because Sylvia has become an icon, and I would be the last person on earth to say Sylvia was not at the Stonewall uprising. I just refer people to David Carter's work. So Joyce Hunter is one of those people who spoke about anger, and let her tell you what how anger motivated her. Joyce tried to kill herself a couple of times, wound up in a psychiatric hospital, and a psychiatrist told her that she would, if she got married and had children, her feelings for women would go away. Well, they didn't. She was a co-founder of the Harvey Milk High School, the first alternative high school for LGBTQ youth in the world. It was in New York City, and also one of the early staff members of an organization called the Hedrick Martin Institute for the Protection of Lesbian and Gay Youth, founded in the 1970s. Here's Joyce Hunter.
One of the things that the movement did for me, it gave me a vehicle to express my anger.
What were you angry about?
Everything. That I had been denied my life, that I had no adolescence. My childhood was robbed. I always say that when I come back in the next life, I want to come out at 2, and I want to be able to enjoy being who I am.
I would have settled for coming out at 14 or 15. But Joyce really wanted to come out at 2. Joyce is still alive. She's in her early 80s. She's been with her wife for 40 years. She has 13 grandchildren from the children that she had. And she went on, after growing up in group homes, she went on to get her GED, her college degree, her BA, her master's, her PhD. She's one of the real heroes of the movement. She's still very much alive, and I speak with Joyce often. She's become a friend. So Deborah Johnson and Zandra Rolón Amato are examples of citizen activists. They had planned to go out for a romantic dinner in the early 1980s in Los Angeles, and it turned into a major legal case. And they will tell you what happened.
At the time, I was working on Saturdays. So this was the first weekend that we were going to have a complete weekend together since we had gotten together. It was also the year right before Martin Luther King's birthday was made into a holiday. And a friend of mine told me about this restaurant that was really nice. And the restaurant had these 6 booths on one side that were real romantic. And we got there, and the waiter kind of questioned us about, are you sure you want the booths? And we told him yes. And it's the type of booths where you have to move the table out so that you can get in, like a horseshoe. And in the middle of the horseshoe was like a fountain, and there was a guy with a violinist who came around, and the booth right in front of the table was a little white sheer curtain that closed in the candlelight, and it was just romantic.
Did it occur to you that this might be a problem?
Not at all. I mean, to me, discrimination never enters my mind first, ever. So they showed us to our table, we sit down, and we're taking our jackets off, and this tall, humongous guy comes by and yanked the table away and told us, so sorry, but you can't sit here. It's against the law and, to serve two men or 2 women in these booths. And we asked to see the manager. And we weren't going to move. The guy that turned out to be the real maitre d' kept giving us the back of the bus type of thing, where you can sit over there and you can sit over here and you'll have free drinks and the whole thing, but you cannot sit here. You will not be served here. And kept insisting that it was against the law. It was against the law. And, that really, it makes me crazy thinking about it. It made me more mad. So you got to remember, we were there about Martin Luther King's birthday, and then we were going to take it off the next day as this real show of solidarity and its importance in the whole bit. And if there's anything the King had taught us, it was that we could sit anywhere in the restaurant we wanted to sit.
And they hired a lawyer. They hired a lawyer who wasn't yet famous, Gloria Allred. She won the case for them. The owner of Papa Shu was required to serve same-sex couples, but instead of doing so, he called a press conference, hauled the romantic booths out to the curb, and said, on this day, romantic dining dies. So they won their case. It actually was an important case. And they served, for me, are examples of how important it is to step up when you can. They had experience already in the gay rights movement and the Black civil rights movement, and they decided they weren't going to stand for Perry Watkins was another citizen activist. He was somebody who served in the military for 15 years, had an exemplary record, and then was thrown out. And he didn't expect to go into the military. He was drafted in 1968, had been studying dance in Europe, came back to the US, to Tacoma, Washington, where he filled out the induction papers and checked off the box that said homosexual, and expected he'd be back on a plane to Europe. But they took him. And this part of the interview where I'm going to play this, the clip I'm going to play for you, is where I couldn't believe that they actually took him. And he's trying to convince me, explain that indeed they did take him into the military.
I was not trying to go into the military. That's why I told them that's why I find it absolutely ludicrous that the Army is in court saying, we don't want this man. Well, why the hell did you take me?
Right.
And why am I the one that is being accused of being at fault? It is amazing. But no, I checked the block, yes. They sent me into a psychiatrist who said to me, why did you check this box? Yes. And I went, because you asked me to fill the form out honestly. Well, do you object to going to the military? No, I didn't want to go in the military. Who did?
Right.
But I certainly had no objection to serving my country.
You were raised to be honest.
Extremely so. Why I really checked the box was because I thought, if I go into the military, I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm gay. I know myself well enough to know that. So when I get thrown out, Mom will be angry if I lie. That was why I checked the box. When I get put out of the military, Mom will be more angry with me for lying than why didn't I just tell the damn truth to begin with?
It took years for Perry to win his case. When I interviewed him, he was living in a rental house, and it was so cold in his living room because he couldn't afford the heat, that we could see our breath. He, of course, when he was thrown out of the military, he didn't get GI benefits. He also couldn't get well-paying work, and lost his house. His partner left him, but his case went on for years. He ultimately won, and was the Army was ordered to re-enlist him, to take him back. He chose to take a settlement instead. He was the Grand Marshal of the New York City Pride March in 1993. He died in 1996 of AIDS, which I think is why we don't know about him, because he's also one of the heroes of the movement. I'm going to guess most of you know who Dear Abby is. When I speak to young groups with very young people, I have to explain that Dear Abby is what you get when you roll up Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, when everyone still loved Ellen, and every internet influencer that you can imagine. She was read by millions and millions of people around the world, including my mother, grandmother, and I read her as well. In the early days of the movement, particularly in the 1960s and 70s, we needed our straight allies. We still do. And Dear Abby was one of the first and one of the most famous people to become an ally. This clip that I'm going to play for you is a story about a letter she got from people who are complaining about new neighbors who were clearly gay. And this is what Dear Abby had to say.
There was a column that you wrote. This is the woman who complained about the new neighbors next door, a strange man in the couple.
Well, the letter was, this is a nice neighborhood, and we're very disgusted with these types. And what could we do to improve the neighborhood? And my answer was, you could move. The gays thought it was hilarious. But other than just being amusing and entertaining, there was a good message there.
Which was?
Which was they have a right to be. If you don't like it, you could move. Because they have as much right to be them as you have to be yourself.
How much of an impact do you think you've had as one person on this issue?
I think I was I would say I was one of the first person on a national level that wasn't gay. I wasn't defending myself. I was defending everyone's right to be themselves, gay, straight, no matter.
And that was in the beginning of the 1950s.
It took, people tell me it took a lot of guts, but I was happy to have a platform such as I had.
I have to tell you, it was so thrilling to interview Dear Abby. She greeted me at her front door at her house in Beverly Hills, double height door, and the door opens, there's this tiny, tiny person, all done up. She was blonde by then, wearing lavender hostess pajamas and pink fluffy slippers. And she invited me in and said, call me Abby. Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husen are two of the most extraordinary members of our community, and innovative and fun leaders of the movement, particularly in the 1960s and early 70s. they had so much fun. I called them the happy warriors because they knew how to use humor to get their message across. Just a very quick story about, and we're going to go to questions after the next clip. These are the last two. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box if you can. So you see them holding dinosaurs here. So they were not in New York City during the Stonewall Uprising. They've been involved in the movement since, Barbara since the 50s, Kay since the early 60s. They were organized with Frank Kameny, some of the first protests in front of the White House beginning in 1965. So after the Stonewall Uprising, they went to one of the meetings of the Gay Liberation Front, an organization founded in New York City right after the Stonewall Uprising. And they were called out for being old people. They were in their 30s. And who were they? And people accused them of being dinosaurs. So Kay, who's on the left, went out and bought stuffed dinosaurs, and they carried those dinosaurs with them to every meeting they went to thereafter. To poke at the young people. And I just love that. Kay is still alive. She just had her 91st birthday a couple of days ago. I speak with her often, and her first question for me always is, what have you got? She wants to know what's doing. And when I went back to, I interviewed her again just a couple of years ago at the retirement community where she lives. She told me about the gay table they started at a dinner table at the retirement community. We did a full episode with Kay's Gay Table. You can find it on our website. In our bonus episodes, you've got to listen to it. It's with a group of people, most of whom thought they didn't make gay history, and the stories were extraordinary. I can't tell you the stories now. I could take the rest of our time to tell them to you. But what I will tell you about is this clip of Barbara and Kay. So in 1971, Barbara got involved with, very involved with the American Library Association and books, because books is where she discovered herself first. The Well of Loneliness was a book she read early on, and where she learned about herself. So for the 1971 American Library Association convention, they rented a table on the conference floor. You've all been to conferences, you know what those huge rooms are like, with all these tables and booths. And they had a booth set up, and they prepared a bibliography of all of the gay positive books. And by 1971, that list filled I think 2 sides of a legal sheet of paper. They posted that sheet of paper all over the convention center. They had it available at their table. They had signs. Nobody cared. Nobody was interested at all. So they decided they were going to do something to get everyone's attention. So imagine this booth with the gray curtains, and Barbara and Kay are going to take you back to that booth in 1971 on the floor of the convention in 1971. And this is what they did to get attention.
Well, we decided to bypass books and show gay love live. So we called it Hug a Homosexual. And we stripped it down to the bare gray curtains, and we had a sign up, men only at one end and women only at the other. And we stationed ourselves, all 4 of us, under the signs to give free, mind you, free same-sex kisses and hugs. Well, let me tell you, the aisles were jammed, but nobody came into the booth.
And Life magazine was there.
Life magazine photographer was there. 2 Dallas television stations had sent camera crews.
Right,
and I think people were rather intimidated. Yes, the lights were on, and all these people jammed in the aisles, craning their necks to see the action, but nobody wanted to take part. So we did the action. We kissed and embraced each other for 2 hours. We handed out copies of the bibliography. We called out encouragement. We kissed and hugged each other some more. Alma Rautzong was an absolute peach. She and I were on the female end, and a couple of the men were on the other. We did all this ourselves. That really put us on the map.
There we were on the 6 o'clock news, and the library and people were livid. They said, we have all these famous authors here, and all they cover is this kissing booth.
They put us on the 6 o'clock news. They put us again on the 11 o'clock news, and again the next morning. This was news.
You speak the local news.
Yes.
Dallas. It was wonderful. And it really, our spirits soared, because really the booth also had a message that was useful in any arena. And that is that gay people are not willing anymore to be subject to a special double standard. If we should have the same right to express our affection publicly as heterosexuals have. No more, but no less.
Gee, I love the 2 of them. I interviewed them for twice, 6 hours on tape. Anyway, so I have one more clip to share with you. And I tell you, I've heard that story at this point probably 50 or 100 times, and I am moved by it every time. I laugh every time. And Barbara's voice is just so, just so rich. And I just love that I still have this relationship with Kay all these years later. This is a final clip with Vito Russo. I interviewed Vito because he was a founder of GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and a co-founder of ACT UP. There were a number of men I needed to interview as soon as I started my work in 1988 who I knew were dying of AIDS. Vito was one of those people. He got involved in the movement in 1970 after a raid of a bar called the Snake Pit in March of 1970. A key figure in the movement and a lovely human being. And at this point in the interview, this clip that I'm going to play for you, he's talking about legacy. He knows that he doesn't have a lot of time. He hopes that he does, but his boyfriend Jeffrey had already died and he was quite ill. So here is Vito Russo talking about the idea of legacy.
I find it interesting, from what I know about the history of the gay movement, that there always have been and there will always be people who are willing to put their lives on the line for these ideas. Starting from Germany in the turn of the century in 1895 around, and then into the early teens and 20s, there were a group of people in Germany headed by Magnus Hirschfeld who were willing to put their lives on the line. They were willing to make a movie called Different from the Others, which the Nazis seized and burned. That in the 1940s and the 1950s, there were the Harry Hayes and the Barbara Giddings and the Mattachine Society. And then in the 60s, gay liberation. It's the more radical issues that I think are still going to be fought over. Whether gay people have a right to adopt children, get married, teach in the public schools, which they do now, but be open about it.
Right.
And those battles are battles that are going to be fought long after you and I are gone. But you have to make a contribution while you're here. I mean, that's been my whole life, is to leave my book behind. That I know after I'm dead, that book is going to be on a shelf someplace, and what I have to say will reach people. And the things I've written, because it's like, who was the person who said that? Pedro Almodovar. He said, the thing is you can't regret your life. Otherwise, why did you live? What was the point of having a life if you didn't say something or do something that was going to survive after you're gone? And that's the way I feel about it. I mean, I really feel the reason why I'm here is so that I could leave this book and these articles so that some 16-year-old kid who's going to be a gay activist in the next 10 or 15 years is going to read them and carry the ball from there. And that'll happen. Happened with me.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Hay passed the ball to the Mattachine, and they passed the ball to us.
And you'll pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
So Vito references his book. It's called The Celluloid Closet. I was just out of college and working at a temp job at a publisher called Harper & Row, now HarperCollins. I found Vito's book on a shelf in one of the editor's offices. It's just been published in paperback, and read it during lunch hour because I didn't want anyone to know I was gay, even though I was sort of out. And 7 years later, that publisher commissioned Making Gay History. So Vito is one of the people who inspired me. And I feel like he passed the ball to me. And in particular, when I speak to college groups, I talk about the ball being handed off. So Vito handed the ball to me at I was in my early 20s. And now I'm 62, and I get to hand the ball off to the next generation because there's much work yet to be done. So before we get to questions, just a little bit of housekeeping. You can find all of our episodes at makinggayhistory.com. That's also where you can sign up for our newsletter to find out what's coming up next. We've just concluded a season of the podcast, which we partnered with the Studs Terkel Radio Archive in Chicago, and just posted an episode yesterday with Meg Christian, who is famous for being one of the founders of the women's music movement. Two of her songs are in the episode that I just love. One is called Ode to a Gym Teacher. I could have written that about one of my gym teachers. And the other one is Leaping Lesbians. She just had this lovely sense of humor, and I hope you listen to that episode. Also, we're on Facebook at Making Gay History, on Twitter at Making Gay History. We didn't misspell it. We just couldn't fit the whole name in the Twitter name. And you can find us on Instagram at Making Gay History Podcast. If you subscribe to podcasts, I hope you'll subscribe to us. But you can also listen to our episodes online. We also have a guide on our website on how to listen to podcasts in case you don't listen to podcasts yet and you'd like to figure out how to do that. I'm going to stop the screen share, coming back to you, and I see there are 4 items in the chat room. Okay. David, did you want to intervene before I answer questions, or no? Okay, I'll go right to questions. It's 8:50. We have 10 minutes. I'm told I can go over by a few minutes, but I'm going to try not to. Are you aware of Abby's Iowa connection? Absolutely, I am. I know Abby's whole story. My partner, who's a literary agent, published a book about Abby and her sister. So yes, and I remain close friends with dear Abby's daughter, Jeannie Phillips, who continues to write the column. They're huge supporters of Making Gay History. Have I interviewed Sarah McBride? I have not. Something that happened to me while I was working on this book all the time, if I was at a public event or a party, I was pinned to a wall on more than one occasion saying, have you interviewed so-and-so, or why haven't you interviewed? I left out almost everybody. I interviewed 100 people for my book, for the 2 editions of the book. I could, and there are only 62 in the book, so I left out a lot from the book. I could have interviewed thousands of people. Some people I couldn't have done this book without, like Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husin, but most of the people in the book are not famous people and didn't necessarily have major roles in the movement. But they did something like Dave did. They came out and shared their story with others, which is an enormous act of courage. I didn't interview Sarah McBride. I didn't interview so many people. One of the joys of doing the podcast is I've been able to dig up archival audio, or at least my researcher has, of people I wish I'd interviewed, like Bayard Rustin, who was Martin Luther King's mentor and the chief architect of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And we found an audio tape of Bayard Rustin talking about his sexuality and its impact on his role in the movement. It was under his surviving husband's bed in a box. Walter Nagel was with Bayard for 10 years, the last 10 years of his life, and he recorded all of Bayard's presentations and interviews on audio cassette. And my executive producer at the time, Sarah Birmingham, who's the founding editor and producer of the podcast, met a woman through her children's elementary school, grew up in the same building that Bayard Rustin lived in, just a few blocks north of where Sarah and I live. My executive producer was across the street. And she was in and out of Bayard's apartment. And so she knew Walter Nagel. And so she introduced Sarah to Walter. And Sarah said, we're looking for a speech that Bayard gave in 1987 at the University of Pennsylvania, where he talked about his sexuality. Long story short, there were multiple handoffs of cassette tapes at the corner of 23rd Street and 8th Avenue here in Manhattan. I joke that we deal in tapes, not drugs. And the tape wasn't usable from that speech that he gave in Pennsylvania, but there was an interview he did with the Washington Blade in 1987. And that interview with who did the interview? Peg Byron. Yeah, it was Peg Byron. Did an interview with him, and that tape was usable. So we did a whole episode with Bayard Rustin. Even though Bayard was dead by the time I'd started my work, we could tell his story. There's another one, Ernestine Eckstein, who's just extraordinary. If you've seen any of the photographs from the march in front of the White House in 1965, there's one African-American woman in white framed cat's eye sunglasses. That's Ernestine Eckstein. I couldn't find her. I looked everywhere for her, but she dropped out of the movement in the late 1960s. She was still alive when I started my work in the 80s. And Sarah Birmingham, my executive producer, found a 1965 interview that Barbara and Kay did with Ernestine, as if Ernestine had come from another planet, because I don't think they'd ever interviewed an African-American person before. And Ernestine, who's in her mid-20s, speaks about the movement in a way that you would never expect a 25-year-old to have this kind of foresight. She really was a prophet of the movement, and is the first person I heard speak of the importance of coming out and the danger of coming out. So, okay, there are 2 more questions in the chat box. Sorry, I always have so many stories that I could chew your ears off, even virtually. When Making Gay History was first published, it was entitled Making History. Was that the original title, or were you forced to edit gay from the original title? We weren't forced, but my editor and I went back and forth on this. And my editor, Rick Cott, is still a friend. He lives down the block here in New York City. And I just asked Rick about this the other day because he couldn't remember. My recollection is that we felt, and he felt, that using the word gay in the title could be problematic, that the sales force at Harper & Row, which was then the name of the publisher, now HarperCollins, the sales force would have trouble selling the book to stores with the word gay in the title, and that booksellers would not put the book face out on a shelf we thought they would actually put the book on a shelf. That didn't happen in a lot of places. But we thought they wouldn't put the book out. Long story short, 10 years later, when the second edition was published, no one could care less. And we put gay in the title. It's made for a little confusion, but the two books are very different. The original book, which I actually prefer, don't tell my publisher, the first book, each person is a chapter. My original intention had been to write the book as a narrative, using the timeline as the narrative and intercutting the stories, which is what I did for the second edition. I wasn't a good enough writer to do it for the first edition, but it loses something when you cut the stories down. I cut a lot of material for the second book to add 10 years and to do it in that way. So you don't get the full background of each story. So my suggestion is, if you're going to read it, read the first edition. You can get it as a digital copy now. It's called Making History, or you can get it as a used book. The second book, I think, is an important document for schools in particular, but I don't find it as comfortable to read because and I know all the stories, I lose track of the stories. But I did provide in the Making Gay History book a list of all the interviewees and a short description of each of them so you could reference them. Next question, it's the last question. And then I might ask myself a question or two. You said that most of the older people, I'm good at asking questions. You said that most of the older people you interviewed said that their parents didn't really have an issue with them being gay. That's actually, I'll explain. Do you think that was before religion and politics used homosexuality as a dividing issue? So most of the parents didn't necessarily understand, but they accepted and loved their children. But yes, I think this did have something to do with the fact that homosexuality wasn't a big issue in politics, and that it wasn't as much of a religious issue. You didn't find people preaching about homosexuality. They wouldn't even mention the word. It was unspeakable. So even if people didn't understand their children, they didn't know it to be homosexuality to be blasphemous or to be a crime against nature. It was thought to be disgusting and sinful and a mental illness, although the mental illness issue came actually more during World War II and after than in the 1920s. But I think for a lot of us who were able to come out to our parents, we found that our parents, that our parents wanted the best for us. They worried for us. They thought we would die from AIDS. Most parents do come to terms with their gay kids over time, but certainly not all. In New York City, 40% of the street kids in New York City are LGBTQ. Jonathan, I see. Did you want to interject here?
I was.
You've just gone.
There. Yeah, I was going to mention that the only directive about dating that I ever received from my father was, he was a United Methodist minister, and his admonition was, whatever you do, don't marry a Catholic. Because of the conflict between your religious beliefs will be more than a relationship can bear. And he didn't say anything about guys.
My grandmother was in her 90s when I split up with my first partner of 9 years. Well, split up isn't fair. He threw me out for good reasons. And he was not Jewish. I'm Jewish. And my grandmother, who was in her 90s, who was actually very fond of my first partner, said, and he was Methodist. And she said, well, maybe this time you can meet a Jewish one. So I dated, and I'm watching the clock. We have 1 minute. I'll turn it over in just 1 minute. I wound up dating a Jewish guy for a while, and she met him. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, did he have to look so Jewish? And I thought, oh my God, my grandmother's anti-Semitic. So that relationship ended too. He dumped me. And I've been with my current partner for 27 years. And when she met him, he was handsome and successful, and he had little features. And I said, he had a small nose and small ears, and he's very handsome. And it was very important to her. Could be a little superficial and judgmental. She adored him from the start, and she never mentioned the fact that he was Catholic. I just love how people find accommodations to deal with their gay kids. And from the beginning, she called him her grandson, and he was an extraordinary grandson to her. She lived to 102. And one of the things she said, she asked us if we've been thinking about adopting. And I said, we were, this is years ago. And she said, don't wait too long. She loved children. So anyway, Jonathan and David, I'm handing this back to you. Again, thank you so much to all of you for allowing me to present this material and share with you. And I hope to see all of you in person one day.
Yes. Eric, we can't thank you enough. We frankly are all a part of the gay history that has been made and continues to be made. Some of us with higher profile roles in that history making than others, but all of us with great courage, with great self-reliance, with a great commitment. And as the history continues to be written, various of us will have roles to play and will be called upon to play those roles going forward. I and many of our members have been privileged to live from a time when homosexuality was immoral, insane, and illegal, a crime in virtually every state in the Union, to the day now where we have same-sex marriage that is legal and no longer is homosexuality a mark of insanity. It is no longer illegal.
Jonathan, may I just interject? What I say to everybody who I hear from, who listens to Making Gay History, is that we are all history makers, whether it's large or small. And it's not to be underestimated the impact that one person can have on others. It really is what has made our movement. Coming out is the most important thing we can do when we can. And that has changed hearts and minds in a way that has made possible the lives, the free lives that we live today. And so,
and as you pointed out, also the importance of allies, such as Abby, for example. And I think librarians are a much underestimated, underappreciated group of allies. They are tenacious about in education and getting the word out. And we all need to be building on allies.
One last thing, we do a lot of work with educators now around the country because LGBTQ history is being incorporated into school curricula for the 8th grade and 11th grade social studies curriculum. So I don't know what, not familiar with what's going on in Iowa, but we're working with the state of Maryland. We're working with the state of Massachusetts, with New York City, on bringing Making Gay History material tailored specifically for schools. So if any of you are working, if any of you is working, any of you are working, if you're working with educators, I want to get my grammar right, be in touch because I can provide you with, actually there's an organization called History Unerased, that's unerased.org, unerased.org. We work with them in partnership in bringing this material to educators, especially the young age educators are keen on teaching this material in no small part because young people are demanding that their teachers teach this material. They are outraged that this material isn't being taught. We also now have a Making Gay History play, which had its first high school premiere in Deerfield, Illinois, which is called Making Gay History Before Stonewall. And it incorporates 20 people from the Making Gay History podcast. So there are lots of efforts to bring this history, your history, our history, to young people today.
And there is going to be more work to be done. I'll give you an example. I receive a notice periodically from Medicare on my Medicare account and whatnot. And it is accompanied with a non-discrimination disclosure. They're printing up a lot of paper and killing a lot of trees to send out this non-disclosure, this non-discrimination reminder. And gay isn't one of the protected categories. And I am then reminded, oh, that's right. It's not protected at the federal level. We still have some work to do. But those who still consider homosexuality immoral, their numbers are shrinking thanks to education and mortality. And what work you are doing, Eric, is helping with that education piece. And education attacks ignorance, and ignorance, prideful ignorance, is what bigotry is. And so education really does attack bigotry at its core. And the work that you're doing is incredible. And the clips that you have preserved and archived are priceless. And you have our gratitude. Thank you very much. Great presentation. We have more to look forward to, folks. At our meeting next February the 5th, our speaker will be Brian Bond, Brian is the executive director of PFLAG National, and he's going to be our speaker in February. He used to be with the Obama administration and served as the LGBTQ advocate for the Obama administration. Yes, Eric.
Before you have him as a guest, I suggest listening to 2 episodes from Making Gay History. In our first season, there's an interview with Gene and Morty Manford, who are co-founders of PFLAG, and the story of how PFLAG came about. And then we did a second episode with Morty Manford, Gene's son, who's a co-founder of PFLAG, who was a young activist in the early 1970s. So that'll be good preparation for hearing from the new head of PFLAG.
Excellent. I think this is the first time that we've been given an assignment to prepare for our next meeting.
I have more.
I'll find those episodes and we can send links out so folks can do that.
Perfect. Excellent, David.
Dave, I'll send you the links.
And also then in March, our speaker is going to be Dr. Ginger Campbell, and she is a podcaster, and she's going to be our speaker in March, on March the 5th. And I have a couple of other speakers that I'm not going to announce at this point. I don't want to overburden you with the information, but we've got some great speakers coming up, just as we have witnessed today. Is there anything else we need to cover?
Yes, Eric won't say this, but he operates off of donations. So you can go to his website, makinggayhistory.com, and become a regular subscriber and also a recurring donor, as I am, to help continue his efforts and support all the work that he's doing to preserve the history and share what has been out there for others to understand.
And
I appreciate that, Dave. Thank you.
that is well said. The work that he's doing is priceless. So it's a very small investment to make to make a contribution and get something that's priceless. Anything else that we need to cover before we adjourn? Hearing nothing, you are welcome. If you would like, we can, those of you who want to turn on your mic and hang around a little bit, we can do that. David, you can accommodate that, right? That
you can stay on as long as they'd like, yes.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to just hang out for a little bit to have some open dialogue, why, one of the great things about our in-person meetings is the fact that we can get together in person and share what's going on in our lives, both before and after the meal and the presentation that we have at our in-person meetings. So we have talked about it a little bit and thought that perhaps there would be those who would like to just hang out for a little bit and have some more open dialogue after we finish our formal meeting. So
I would just say thank you and goodbye. I have another meeting to go to. And thank you so much for the privilege of sharing with you. And I really do look forward to seeing you in your neighborhood once we've all had vaccinations. Please invite me back. I'll be there.
And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Bye-bye.
We don't need to leave just yet. Let's see if anyone else is coming. So anyone who would like to hang around, while you can turn on your mic and you can make any comments, whatever. Rick, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I just want to say that I feel a little alone here, and then I don't feel alone. So what's going on is, as the Pride Center person in charge of archives and history, I am very interested in having people join me. I need other people to help with the interviews. I am now dedicating myself to Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesday mornings, I am actually taking all the items from the Evolution of the Revolution museum show, and I am labeling everything. So someone can actually put this show together